Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 9 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs. Keep this in mind that the first 3 articles are very much relevant for the upcoming mains examination, and we also provide you with the opportunity to attempt answer writing on the current issues. The topics are as follows. In the first topic, we are going to understand the recent developments which has taken place between India and China relations and also look at the way forward which has been suggested by the Chinese ambassador. In the second topic, we'll try to understand what do we mean by the ecologically sensitive areas in the backdrop of the recent landslides which has taken place in Kerala. In the third topic, we'll try to understand the writ jurisdiction of Supreme Court and we will compare that with the High Court writ jurisdiction as well. Followed by the fourth topic, where we are going to learn about the Great Nicobar project and the legal challenges which it is facing. And finally, in the fifth topic, we will learn about the concept of contempt of court. Toward the end, there will be news snippets which will also help you in the prelims examination, so stay tuned. The lead editorial by the 17th Chinese ambassador to India put impetus on the revival of India-China relations by providing 5 guidelines for mutuals. Thus, we are going to study about the Dragon-Elephant Tango or the China-India relations, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of India and its neighborhood, as well as the effect of policies and politics of countries on India's interest. Now keep this in mind that India and China are the giant economies of Asia, with China being the second and India being the 5th largest economy in the world in the terms of GDP. At the same time, both of the countries also share the epithet of being one of the most populous countries in the world as well as fastest growing economies of the world as well. However, if you look at the recent years, they have been marked by the atmosphere of mutual enmity instead of peaceful coexistence. And this is going to be the segment on which we are going to put impetus upon. So now one might be wondering that whether there has been this mutual enmity since the ancient past itself. The answer is no. We do share a history of peaceful coexistence with China. So for example, from your history book, you might recall about the Silk Route trade which used to take place and to which India was connected through the Uttarapath with some major cities such as, for example, Pushkalavati or the modern day Peshawar, where the Indian merchants actively participated in the trade of silk, horses, honey, paper, gunpowder, etc. It was within this same time period when China was actually suffering from the mainland syndrome, where a religion had really become popular in their particular country, but they had very less knowledge about its origin and its larger cultural aspect. That is why this very same Silk Route was taken by various travelers such as, for example, Xuanzang, who came to India to rediscover their Buddhist heritage, ultimately providing for the exchange of cultural knowledge as well. Centuries later, when China got its independence in 1949, India was one of the first non-socialist countries to recognize the Public Republic of China. And this relationship was further strengthened by the signing of Panchsheel Agreement in the year of 1954 between India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. What were the 5 principles of this Panchsheel Agreement of 1954? First of all, it was about the peaceful coexistence between the two newly independent nations, where they actually put impetus on the mutual benefits which they can derive from each other. The third was the mutual non-interference in the internal affairs, so that basically they can just focus upon their own economic development. And on this very basis, there was the agreement on mutual respect for the territorial integrity as well as mutual non-aggression. However, this rhetoric of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai soon turned the tables, especially in the late 1950s. And what was the reason for that? The first was the adoption of the 5-finger strategy of the Mao Zedong, where he basically said that China is the palm and it has 5 fingers of growth in the region of South Asia. What are these 5 regions of growth? The Ladakh, where they have currently the illegal occupation in the region of Aksai Chin, the Tibet, the Nepal, the region of Sikkim, Demchok, and Arunachal Pradesh or Northeastern Frontier Agency according to China, where Mao Zedong basically started claiming that India is keeping this Tibet and Nepal as buffer states for future warfare with China, just adopting the colonial ideology. So what the colonial or the Britishers were doing, they were creating buffer states. For example, Awadh for prevention of Maratha attack, or for example Hyderabad for the prevention of Mysore attack. So Mao Zedong started claiming that India is exactly doing the same, and thus it started putting pressure on the integration of Tibet with this mainland China, where China faced the resistance by the 14th Dalai Lama, who actually fled the Tibet and sought refuge to India. Thus, there were various geopolitical factors which were actually shaping India and China relations in 1960s. One of them was also the sheer pressure from the opposition, who were claiming that how India can remain silent when, how a mother can remain silent when the child is being attacked, that is Tibet. Thus, Nehru was pushed forward to adopt for a forward policy in 1960s, where he told the China that you should first of all, whatever the illegal regions you have occupied in the region of Aksai Chin, first go back from there, and then only bilateral talks can take place. And this eventually catapulted to the 1962 India-China war, where China attacked on various fronts on this same very 5-finger strategy, the Northeastern Frontier strategy, your regions of Assam, your regions of the currently illegally occupied Aksai Chin. And India faced defeat and thus lost several strategic areas, and thus Nehru lamented that China actually wanted to prove that China is the top dog in Asia. Since then, our relations with China has remained in a stalemate with on and off efforts with both of the countries, which has further been actually demented because of the Galwan Valley clash which took place in the year of 2020. So what are the prevailing conflicting issues between India and China which actually prevents the cordial relation between the dragon and the elephant? The first is obviously the line of actual control issue. So the ingression by the People's Liberation Army of China on the region of line of actual control is obviously one of the major contentious issue. This line of actual control, it actually expands around 3,488 km according to India, but according to China it is only 2,000 km long, because it does not include the regions of Tibet or the regions of, for example, Arunachal Pradesh, which it calls as southern Tibet, right? So now according to India adopts for the Johnson line, which was adopted in the year of 1865, according to which this Aksai Chin region forms an integral part of our country. However, China adheres to the MacDonald line, to which it reached till the year of 1962. And now just imagine that this is not like a inhabited area. These are basically the valleys which are lying, and they are not demarcated like line of control with Pakistan, right? Also, in this particular area, there are 65 patrolling stations, of which 26 remain out of reach for India. Thus, we have a strategic disadvancement in this particular region as well. In the recent years, especially in the wake of the Galwan clash which took place, China has actually took place a quantum jump in surveillance in this particular region. By doing what? By putting emphasis on road infrastructure, by putting impetus on various kind of technological advancements which it is doing. At the same time, China is also trying to stabilize its presence in this particular region by creation of model villages. So obviously, if we are going to take this issue to United Nations, China is going to claim the existence of the innocent Chinese people in this particular region as a counterpart to the India's claim. All of this techniques which are being adopted by China, all of this forms part of the salami slicing strategy of China, which is basically the small steps which China is taking place for a larger impact, as it has decided that it has been humiliated for 100 years, the 100 years of humiliation theory, and thus it is going to emerge as the superpower in the world by the year of 2049. Then what are the other concerns? Obviously, the next concern is of the maritime security, the creation of string of pearls, where China is now currently creating various commercial ports, but these same commercial ports can be used for military installations in the case of future warfare. The ports such as, for example, Gwadar in Pakistan, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, Sitwe in Myanmar. At the same time, it is also the Chinese finance ports, military ports are being created in the region around of the Gulf of Aden as well, in the countries such as, for example, Sudan and Tanzania. Then obviously another major issue is that we are not only surrounded with two turbulent neighbors, we are also surrounded with two nuclearly powered countries, and these nuclear powered countries are also having increasing collusion, especially in the form of Belt and Road infrastructure, of which the China-Pakistan economic corridor forms an integral part of this Belt and Road infrastructure. This CPEC, which starts from Kashgar in China and ends at Gwadar in the Arabian Sea, keep this in mind that it crosses through the illegally occupied line of control region of Pakistan. So now at United Nations, when it comes to the issue of Kashmir, there are two parties, India and Pakistan. But the moment this infrastructure is being created, China will also become a party in this particular contention. Then the fourth major issue is obviously India's increasing economic dependence on China. So see, China is the second largest trading partner of India. Who is the first or the largest trading partner of our country? That is USA. But here lies the major difference. With USA, we are on trade surplus. But with China, we are incurring a trade deficit, a heavy trade deficit of up to $83 billion. At the same time, we are also overtly reliant on China for the major portions of our economy. For example, active pharmaceutical ingredients, for example, your electronics, semiconductor chips, all of that. Now just imagine that you have a neighbor and you are overtly reliant on that neighbor. That neighbor has given you some loans. That neighbor is recharging your Netflix account. That neighbor is actually providing you, money for the food. So what will happen in future in the case if you guys get into the fight? The neighbor has the authority to cut down all of your essential supplies, and because we are overtly reliant on China for our import as well as export, China has huge potential to cause supply chain disruptions in our economy. So this is another major issue. Beside these issues, there are certain other major challenges which are emerging in the recent years. The first is obviously the prevailing energy crisis. So for example, China is trying to create dams on the Brahmaputra river, a project called as Medoc project, where China is basically trying to generate 60 gigawatts of electricity, which is nearly 3 times of the Three Gorges Dam, which is currently in China, which is the world's biggest hydroelectric plant. So obviously, if this dam is going to come into existence, it is going to curb down our hydropower generation capacity in the future, as well as it can actually lead to water crisis in the region of Northeast. Then there is a China's wolf warrior diplomacy strategy, where China solely relies on its own strategic and economic interest on the cost of other country, and that can be seen from its expansionist policy in the South China Sea under the 9-dash line. So that is hampering our Indo-Pacific strategy as well, our secure lines of communication in the sea. Then obviously there is a growing Sino-Russian nexus in the form of, for example, the Great Eurasian Partnership, which basically aims to connect the Belt and Road Initiative of China with the Eurasian Economic Union, which is actually led by Russia. So now India can actually come into the light where we can, in reality, we actually share like good relationship with Russia. We have a strategic relationship. But because of this increasing nexus, India can come in light of, adopting for anti-Russia policy, because we are part of what? We are part of Quad grouping, which consists of USA, Australia and Japan. Then, as per the Happy Man Jacob analysis, there is uncertainty about the strategic action of major powers, just for example USA and Russia, in the case of future warfare if it take place between India and China, or at the joint front between India and China and Pakistan. So we do not exactly know that what they are going to adhere to, which kind of a strategy they will adopt, and what will be the reaction of United Nations Security Council. Thus, to tackle with all of these emerging challenges, there has been India's strong response to that, following the words of Mark Twain, where he said that history does not only repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So we have to make sure, our diplomacy has to make sure that the events of 1962 is not repeated, and for that purpose we have taken several strategic steps. The first is, obviously, let's first look at what we have done on the security channel, the border security. So first of all, we have created diplomatic channels. For example, the meeting of commander corps which are taking place for the de-escalation at the border level, for the engagement with the Chinese troops. The second is that we have put impetus on the border agreements which were signed in 1993 and 2013, where we are actually, trying to keep China on the table for co-patrolling, right? Peaceful coexistence, so that no escalation take place. The third is that we have actually also put impetus upon the TEP upgradation at the border. So for example, the Border Road Organization has put a lot of impetus on the infrastructure development in the Daulat Beg Oldie region. At the same time, we have also put a high level of surveillance through unmanned aerial vehicles. Then we have taken several steps on the economic front. The first is to scrutinize the Chinese investment. So for example, the banning of Chinese apps which took place, or for example, from the 5G trials, the Chinese companies were kept completely out. At the same time, we have also put FDI restrictions on China's companies. The next is that we have actually put impetus on cutting down our import dependency. How we have done that? By creating bulk drug parks for active pharmaceutical ingredient, or for example, launching production linked incentive scheme. The next is that we have actually tried to establish strong relations with our neighbors under the neighborhood first policy, such as the vaccine Matri initiative which took place, or for example, providing economic grants to Sri Lanka. Then we have also tried to increase our cultural connect with the people living at the border under the Vibrant Village program as well, on which a mains question had appeared in 2023. Now, what are the way forward which has been provided by the Chinese ambassador to our country? That is the 5 guidelines of mutuals which you can use in your answers. Where first he says that both the countries shall have mutual respect for the development trajectory which they have taken place across the years, and thus they shall strive to put economic partnership at the front. The second is to develop a mutual understanding, and that can be done through increasing cultural cooperation between both the countries. The third is to develop mutual trust. So the mutual suspicion which lies and the attrition, that shall be discarded, and that we can done by joining various groupings and leading them at the front, such as for example G20, BRICS, ASEAN, etc. That can ultimately lead to mutual accommodation, and we can also try for mutual accomplishments, such as for example increasing the cultural connect. That can be done through people exchange, student exchange, etc. At the same time, we can also try to put impetus upon soft diplomacy. Soft diplomacy in which we can actually try to utilize our Buddhist heritage. So we can create tourism circuits for that, especially inviting the China's tourists. So these are the kind of way forwards which can be taken for India and China relationship, and on the basis of this, try to solve this particular question, a probable one for your mains examination. If possible, comment your answer in the comment box. we move forward to the next news. In the aftermath of the devastating landslides which took place in Kerala, the union government has actually reissued for the 6th time in decade a notification for the classification of ecologically sensitive areas in the region of Western Ghats. These ecologically sensitive areas, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment conservation. The question here arises is that what are these ecologically sensitive areas? So the story starts from the year of 2010 when the Ministry of Environment actually created a committee called as Gadgil Committee. The Gadgil Committee was tasked to actually examine the region of Western Ghat and provide suggestion for the protection and conservation of this particular region. The committee submitted its report in 2011, where it said that the whole region of Western Ghats is actually a ecologically sensitive area. And it divided this ecologically sensitive area into 3 zones being 1, 2 and 3. And it said that the determination of these ecologically sensitive zones can be taken place at block or taluka level, where it said that this region is so ecologically sensitive that there shall be no new polluting industries either in red or orange category, as well as existing industries in this particular region shall be phased out by the year of 2016 itself. So obviously you can predict that what would have happened next. A kind of a huge uproar by the industrialist lobby as well as by the government. You curtail the industries, you curtail the employment, you curb the money power or money supply in the hands of the people. The people come out on the road, protest against the government. Which government will want that? So what they did, they established another committee called as Kasturi Rangan Committee. The Kasturi Rangan Committee, which submitted its report now in 2013, where it said that no. First of all, it divided the Western Ghat region into 2 parts, the cultural landscape and the natural landscape. Then it said that of this natural landscape, only 37% of the region is ecologically sensitive. Then it said that now the demarcation can be done at the village level and we need to phase out only the red category industries or the highly polluting industries. Thus, it said that in this ecologically sensitive zone 1, which is the highly sensitive region, there can be certain prohibited activities and certain regulated activities. What are prohibited activities? The prohibited activities are the commercial mining, the commercial use of timber, the industries which are causing heavy level of pollution, any major hydroelectric project which is more than 25 megawatt, or discharge of solid waste in the drains in the rivers of this particular region. Then there are certain activities which shall be only regulated. That is, for example, felling of trees, establishment of hotels obviously for the purpose of ecotourism, the commercial use of natural water, laying down of underground cable, for example, for the purpose of digital India. Then drastic change in the cropping patterns, so for example, changing the crops from the native crops to the commercial crops such as rubber and tea. Now, when these 2 committees suggested for this, what were the major differences between them? Let's first try to understand that. So Gadgil said that the entire Western Ghat is the ecologically sensitive area. Kasturi Rangan said what? No. First cultural natural, out of natural only 37%. Then the Gadgil Committee actually suggested for the bottom-up approach, where it said or put a lot of impetus on the Gram Sabha in the decision making of which project shall be allowed. On the other hand, the Kasturi Rangan Committee put impetus on what? On the center, state and forest officials. So obviously the government is going to be more inclined toward this particular committee suggestions. The Gadgil said that there shall be a complete ban on all the construction of the high capacity storage dams, specifically in the regions of ecologically sensitive zone 1 as well as sand mining. Kasturi Rangan said that there shall be a complete ban on quarrying and sand mining in this ecologically sensitive zone 1 area, but the hydroelectric plants are very much permissible. Then Gadgil report had suggested that there shall be an independent Western Ghat Ecological Authority created under the Ministry of Environment to regulate over the development in the region. However, the Kasturi Rangan said that this power shall remain in the hand of State Pollution Control Board and the State Biodiversity Boards. Remember that these Western Ghat regions which we are talking about, they span across 6 states: Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Goa, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, from north to south, right? And it comprises of around 56,825 kilometers square of area, out of which the highest area lies in the state of Karnataka, followed by Maharashtra, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Goa, and the least area is under Gujarat. Also keep this in mind that till now the central government has issued 6 notifications, draft notifications, which has been rejected by these state governments. The question arises that what are these Western Ghats and why their protection is so much of importance. Let's first try to understand that what are these Western Ghats, certain specifications about that. So we have already studied that how they span across 6 states. They span across 1600 kilometers. They start from the south of Satpura range, from Tapi estuary, and they extends up to Kanyakumari in Tamil Nadu. Now, is this Western Ghat range is a contiguous range? The answer is absolutely no. There lies a Pal Ghat gap. A Pal Ghat gap which basically lies between the Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu and Palakkad in Kerala. So this is not a complete contiguous zone. Now the importance can be seen that it is one of the 43rd UNESCO World Heritage Site. The 43rd UNESCO World Heritage Sites, the Madams of Assam, which has been enlisted very recently, you guys might have read about it. Then it is also one of the 36 biodiversity hotspot, which is the highest peak in this Western Ghats. That is your Anai Mudi peak here, which is of around 2695 meter tall. Another interesting fact is that these Western Ghats, they actually curve when they come towards south, and they actually meet the Eastern Ghat at a particular place. The task for the day is that can you guys name that place in the comment box where the Western Ghat and Eastern Ghats meets together. Now let's try to put impetus on their importance. The first is obviously that Western Ghats plays an important role in the determination of the climate because they act as the watershed to the southwest monsoon which approaches this particular region. And thus they lead to a heavy rainfall in this windward side. Now obviously this particular region, it acts as a source of major rivers. Major rivers, for example, Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri, etc. which actually drains how much? They drains 40% of the land surface of the country. Also providing water supply to the millions of people. You guys might be reading about the Kaveri water river sharing dispute which is taking place between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Then these very same Western Ghats, because they have got such large tracts of pristine forest, they play a very important ecological function, that is the sequestration of carbon dioxide, where as per estimate they neutralize 4 million tons of carbon every year. That is about 10% of the emission which is neutralized by all of India's forest. The next is obviously that they act as a biodiversity hotspot. So for example, these Western Ghats, they consist 30% of the flora and fauna of the country, of which 60% is endemic, which basically means that it is only found in the region of Western Ghats. Then as per IUCN list, there are 325 globally threatened species in this particular region, such as for example, Nilgiri teher, your lion-tailed macaque, tiger, elephant, which is listed as vulnerable, or for example dhole, all of that. At the same time, when we have put impetus upon the ecological and the biodiversity functions which are being provided or promulgated by these Western Ghats, are they important for our Indian economy as well? The answer is absolutely yes, because they contain the rich reservoir of minerals such as for example the mines of iron, bauxite and manganese. At the same time, they also, a lot of commercial crops is grown in this region. Again, recall from your history classes, when Vasco da Gama arrived in India, in this particular region in 1498, what he took from India? Pepper, spices, cardamom, rubber, coffee, tea. At the same time, this particular region also act as a major tourist hotspot, such as places, for example, your Sindhudurg, Ratnagiri, Goa, Kudremukh, Ooty, Munnar, or the very famous Jog Falls. If you guys are going from Karnataka to Goa, you will see Jog Falls there. Now, when we have understood about the importance, this very same region is actually crashing down and is very much prone to the landslides. So if we look at the whole of the country, which is the state which has the largest area under landslide? That is Sikkim, right? So Sikkim has around 56% of its area under the susceptibility of landslides. Now, apart from Himalayas, Kerala is the state which has most of the region under the susceptibility of landslide, almost 14%. And there is a major reason because of the so much landslides take place actually in this particular area of Western Ghats. If we look at the report, that is Landslide Atlas of India published by ISRO, there are two prominent factors. The first is the conditioning factors. In conditioning, the first is your soil topography. So obviously, the soil topography of this particular region of Western Ghat has been completely changed. Why it has happened? Because see, earlier what used to happen, that there used to be a lot of native crops which used to be grown in this particular region. These native crops, they used to have long roots. Thus, they used to just integrate or hold down the topsoil with the bedrock. So a frequent slide of this topsoil was not possible. However, these native crops has now been changed to various commercial crops. Commercial crops, for example, coffee or tea, these crops has actually shallower roots, and thus if any extreme weather events take place, it ultimately leads to what? Removal of this topsoil layer. The second is the rock geomorphology. So obviously from your geography classes, you guys can actually remind that how this land is actually of igneous origin, created by volcanic activity. So it has got actually a lot of fissures in this particular region. So even if there is any extreme weather event, a flow of water or a flow of huge amount of wind, it actually takes the rocks into, or the disintegration of boulders take place very easily. The next is the increasing slope angle because of the bedrock cutting or the various geomorphological factors. Then there are obviously the triggering factors, and this is where the anthropogenic activities of us humans becomes responsible, such as for example the climate change induced extreme weather events which are taking place, or the land use changes, such as for example the large scale deforestation which has taken place, the unscientific construction activities in this particular region, replacement of forest by the various kind of buildings, construction of roads, etc. Then the large scale mining activities, the blockage of stream networks, or the large scale hydropower projects in this particular region. Just look at this Google map, the amount of hydropower projects which you guys can see in this very region of Western Ghat, these dams which are actually damming the Western Ghats. Thus, what can be the ideal way forward? What can be the bureaucratic approach here? The first is obviously to prevent the fragile ecosystem. How we can do that? First, we can adopt for sustainable agricultural practices, such as for example adoption of organic farming under Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana. Or what we can do, we can actually start using the sustainable land use methods. That is something which we can do. The second is to engage all the stakeholders, such as for example the villagers, the civil society organizations which are working in this particular region, the organizations such as for example the administration at the local level. To do what? To actually understand the local needs, and instead of just declaring all the area as ecologically sensitive area, a specific area wise mapping shall be done and specific measures shall be provided. The third is that all of this can actually lead to the sustainable development process, where there shall be healthy balance between the development and the protection of environment. The fourth is to adopt for climate proofing strategies, such as for example creation of a strong early warning system, or for example reforestation through using Miyawaki method in this particular region. The fifth is obviously that the implementation of ecologically sensitive areas shall be done, even though if you are going to follow the Kasturi Rangan report. But that has become the necessity, especially in the wake of the recent landslide which has taken place there. In the light of this, try to attempt this particular mains question. We move forward to the next segment. Supreme Court in recent observing has held that writs power under Article 32 shall be used only when the normal remedies has been exhausted. Thus, the Article 32, which provides for various type of writs, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of judiciary and Indian Constitution, has made the headlines. The reason being because Supreme Court observed that it will be immature of its part to constitute a special investigation team to conduct probe into the electoral bonds data, where basically the petitioner was claiming that a normal investigation cannot be produce results because these investigating officers are themselves involved in the transaction of such electoral bonds. But the Supreme Court said that Article 32 should proceed only after the normal remedies which are provided under the criminal procedures have failed. And it said that if the petitioner is facing any kind of challenges in investigation by these authorities, then the petitioner shall first move to the High Court under the Article 226. As the writs power are provided for Supreme Court under Article 32, similarly the writs power are also provided for High Courts under the Article 226 of the Constitution. The first thing which we'll try to understand is that what is this power of writs which is provided under Article 32 to the Supreme Court. To understand that, first we need to develop a basic understanding about the Article 13 of the Constitution, which basically says that any law or all the laws which are inconsistent with the fundamental rights shall be declared null and void. Fundamental rights such as, for example, the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression under Article 90, under which you students have so bravely raised the banner of revolt against the authorities because of the mishappenings which has taken place in Delhi. Now, the Article 13 says that if there is any law which is being inconsistent with these fundamental right of yours, that will be declared as null and void. What constitutes here the term law? It can be a permanent law, which is basically a law which has been enacted by the parliament or state legislature, or it can be a temporary law. For example, the ordinances which are passed by the president under Article 123 of the Constitution. It can be any statutory instruments, for example, bylaws, rules, notifications, regulations, etc., as well as any non-legislative source of law, for example, any custom or any uses which has the force of law. Now, a question arises. What about constitutional amendment? So originally Article 13 had said that this constitutional amendment does not fall under the purview of the term law, and thus they cannot be challenged. However, Supreme Court in Keshwanand Bharti case of 1973 held that no, constitutional amendment can be challenged as well. Why? Because these fundamental rights form the part of basic structure doctrine. So basically, the Article 13 expressively provides for the doctrine of judicial review. And this is where the Article 32 comes into force, where it says that any individual has the right, you and me, to move directly to the Supreme Court for the enforcement of their fundamental rights. And thus Article 32 provides Supreme Court with certain powers, such as, for example, writs, to enforce your fundamental rights. Now, when we have understood this, what are the different types of writs which are provided? First is your habeas corpus. What is the purpose of that? The purpose is that it can actually lead where the court can direct any authority to release the person who has been detained unlawfully. Right? So for example, you are protesting and you are protesting for a correct cause, and that falls within the purview of freedom of speech and expression. So the court can issue habeas corpus to release you from the prison. Now this can be issued against the public authority as well as private individuals. The only writ which can be issued against the private individual, that is habeas corpus, to which it cannot be issued. It cannot be issued for if there is a lawful detention, if you were actually using violative methods while you were protesting, or for the contempt of court. That is something which we are going to discuss in this particular section a bit later. Then mandamus. under which the court actually directs a public authority to do your duty, right? It basically scolds the authority. To which authorities it can scold? Any public authority, corporation or tribunal or any lower court. But it cannot scold to whom? Any private individual. So for example, you were not studying, you were not doing your duty. So for that, court can issue the writ of mandamus? Absolutely not. You are a private individual. The second is if the act does not have any statutory force or if the duty was in the discretionary nature. The third is quo warranto, where the court basically direct a person to vacate an office which has been assumed wrongfully. This can be issued only against judicial or quasi-judicial authorities and absolutely not against any ministerial or private office. The fourth is prohibition. Prohibition of what? Prohibiting a lower court from proceeding on a case. And obviously this will be issued against whom? Any judicial and quasi-judicial authorities. Remember, when it comes to prohibition, that no, you should not proceed further in this case. I am transferring this case to CBI as it has taken place in the case of Delhi mishappenings, right? In that case, it can also be issued against administrative authorities. So for example, the court very recently directed the municipal corporation, you keep aside, we are now moving in the CBI. Now this prohibition cannot be issued against any legislative body or the private body, right? The next is certiorari. The certiorari is basically the transfer of cases, right? You transfer your case to me. So transferring of case from lower court to higher court, that can be done only against statutory or constitutional office. So keep these important writs in your mind, the purposes of that. Now, the another debate is that what is the difference between the writ power of Supreme Court and the writ power of High Court, right? So now we will try to compare the writ power of Supreme Court and High Court. What is the purpose for which Supreme Court can issue any writ? The Supreme Court can issue the writ jurisdiction, which we have seen, only to enforce the fundamental right. However, High Court can issue that for fundamental as well as legal rights of yours. So for example, can Supreme Court issue writs for right to property? No, because right to property is not a fundamental right. It is a legal right under Article 300A. Then against which person or government such writ can be issued? So Supreme Court can issue against any person or government located anywhere in the country because it governs the whole country. However, High Court, it can issue only if that person is within its territorial jurisdiction or if the case arises within its territorial jurisdiction. The next is, does Supreme Court has right to refuse? Absolutely not. Why? Because Article 32, that is writ jurisdiction, in itself is a fundamental right. However, High Court can refuse. Why? Because there can be a legal writ as well, right? So High Court has the power to refuse. The Supreme Court cannot refuse at all. On the basis of this, try to attempt this particular question. If possible, comment your answer in the comment box. We move forward to the next news. The article highlights the legal challenges which actually surrounds the Great Nicobar Development Project, which has been proposed by the Niti Aayog. And it forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment pollution and degradation. Let's first try to understand the importance of the Great Nicobar for our country, which is basically forms the southernmost tip of India, which forms the part of Nicobar archipelago, which consists of 600 odd islands. And because this region receives rainfall of more than 3,500 mm, this region's vegetation consists of lush green rainforest, mangroves as well as pandan forest. And thus this region is also responsible for one of the great biodiversity hotspots, where you can find various endangered and endemic species such as, for example, giant leatherback turtle, the great Nicobar megapode, or for example, crab eating macaque. You can also find Nicobar tree shrew. All of these endemic and endangered species are found in this particular region. At the same time, this region is also provide habitation to two important tribal communities. One is obviously the Shompen tribe, which are basically 250 in the numbers, and they largely remain isolated from the major inhabitants of the island because they live inside the forest region. The second is the Nicobaris, and both of these constitute around 6,000 people who are living in this particular islands, and both of them are categorized under the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. Now, why this region is so strategically and economically important for our country as well? Because the kind of potential it has to create the transshipment routes in the region of Indo-Pacific. Just look here. Here is your Great Nicobar, where a kind of a particular transshipment port is actually being envisaged by the Niti Aayog. Just look the potential it has for the trade routes such as Bangkok in Thailand, Phuket to Indonesia, to the region of Kolkata here connecting our mainland, to Sitwe in Myanmar, connecting it with the Yangon river and region, or with Sri Lanka. And just look at the very least distance it has with all of these particular regions. So that is why Niti Aayog actually proposed for a holistic development of the Great Nicobar Island, which is being actually constructed by the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Integrated Development Corporation, called as ANITCO, where it has been envisaged creation of a township, an airport, a transshipment terminal, as well as a power plant. Just look at this particular region here. So here is your Campbell Bay National Park. This is where your township area is being developed, very near to this Campbell Bay. Then here is coming your international airport, which will basically connect the various regions. The tourism activity will actually increase in this particular area. Here there will be a power plant within the Galathea National Park. At the same time, here at Galathea Bay, a kind of a transshipment terminal is being created to further increase the trade routes in the Indo-Pacific region. Is it important for our economy? Yes, absolutely. However, there are certain concerns which are involved with this project. The first is obviously the ecological concern, such as diversion of 130 km square of forest land, which will ultimately lead to felling of 10 lakh trees. At the same time, very recently, the Ministry of Environment has de-notified two important wildlife sanctuaries. One was your Galathea Bay Wildlife Sanctuary and the other was your Megapode Wildlife Sanctuary. Then the creation of this transshipment port which we are seeing at this Galathea Bay, this area is basically the nesting site of the giant leatherback turtle, which is actually protected under the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. Just find out the IUCN status of this species and comment down in the comment box, leading to its particular importance, right? So remember that this Galathea Bay is one of the world's largest nesting site for this giant leatherback turtle. The second major issue is the violation of tribal rights which can take place and already has taken place, such as the authorities in this particular region has actually concealed the information from the tribal councils, which eventually led them to provide their agreement to this particular project, but now they have withdrawn it. The second is the epidemic cleansing of the Native Americans which took place in 16th century, that can be repeated as well. So for example, when the colonizers they reached to the region of America, they actually introduced there certain disease such as, for example, smallpox, measles, influenza, all of that. That actually led to the mass scale falling of the native population in America. The same fear is actually also prevalent among the Shompen tribe, because just now we have studied that they remain secluded from the mainland population. So they have, their immune system has not adopted for these kind of infectious disease which us humans can introduce there, or large scale tourist activity can introduce there. The third is obviously the poor check on disaster impact, because if you are looking at this particular region is actually falling in the seismic zone of earthquake area, right? So a lot of infrastructure and the checking systems which could have deployed, that has been completely ignored. Now this particular Great Nicobar project has been in the news. Why? Because there are certain legal challenges which has emerged, and we will look at the recent ruling by the National Green Tribunal. Now there is a kind of an NGO called as CAT. The CAT actually challenged the clearance of project of this Great Nicobar project up to the high tide line, which basically violates the coastal regulation zone which has been laid down. To which, in the response, the National Green Tribunal, it constituted a high-powered committee to review the green clearance which was provided to this project by the Ministry of Environment. What has been the finding of this high-powered committee? The high-powered committee says that this proposed transshipment port here, that does not fall in this Island Coastal Regulation Zone 1A, and thus it is completely legal. The second it says is that there shall be allowance of such project in the need for the development and the national security. So is the project very important for our economic security in the region of Indo-Pacific? The answer is absolutely yes. But the development shall not be done at the cost of environment and the original inhabitants of that particular region. This is something which we need to ensure. Keep these suggestions in your mind. We move forward to the next news, where we will talk about the contempt of court in the context of an IAS officer who has actually been charged of this criminal contempt of court by the Jammu and Kashmir's High Court. And this concept forms an important component of your preliminary examination under the theme of judiciary and the Indian Constitution. First, we will try to understand what do we mean by this contempt of court. The contempt of court is basically the act of disrespect or disobedience towards a court or interfering with the procedure of the court. So this has been basically provided as a protection to the judicial authority. So first we are saying that the courts can actually issue the writs. So let's say the court issued the writ of habeas corpus. It told the body that no, you have detained this student illegally, release it. What if the authority refuses to accept this decision? So that authority has done what? The contempt of court, and now the Supreme Court can punish for contempt of court under Article 129 and the High Court can punish under Article 215. Also, there is a statutory backing. So when our constitution makers were providing this right to actually protect the judicial authority, they only said contempt of court. It has been defined and expanded into various types by the Contempt of Court Act of 1971. Remember that in the original constitution itself, the contempt of court was provided as a restriction to the Article 19, that is freedom of speech and expression, right? Now there are two types of contempts. The first is a civil contempt. Civil contempt is basically I was an officer. I had arrested the students who were protesting in Delhi. Now the court said that no, this is an unlawful detention, release them. I disobeyed of the direction given by the court. I have committed what? A civil contempt. So civil contempt is basically the willful disobedience to any judgment, order or writs. The second type is a criminal contempt. Criminal contempt is when I am publishing or trying to scandalize the proceedings of the court. That is publication of matter or act which actually lowering the authority of court, that will be considered as a criminal contempt. So for example, when Prashant Bhushan, he openly criticized the Supreme Court, he was charged under the criminal contempt of court and fine of 1 rupee was put on Prashant Bhushan, right? So remember this interesting concept of contempt of court. Try to solve this particular prelims question which appeared in 2022. Just a suggestion that this act which we were talking about, it was actually promulgated on the recommendation of a committee called as H.N. Sanyal Committee. On the basis of this, try to solve this question, comment your answers, and we move forward to the next segment of the news, where we are going to cover some very interesting news which can actually help you to eliminate some important statements in the prelims examination. The first news actually talks about a mission called as Axiom 4 mission. Why it has made the news? Because ISRO has recently designated 2 Indian astronauts or Gagan Yatri which will be taking participation in this Axiom 4 mission which will fly to the International Space Station. This Axiom 4 mission is basically a coordinated venture of NASA, the space agency of United States of America, and a private company called as Axiom Space, where it will be their fourth private astronaut mission, which will ultimately lead to the International Space Station. The International Space Station, which was launched in the year of 1998 and comprises of 15 countries' efforts, as for example NASA of USA, European Space Agency, JAXA, Russia's space agency, etc. Right? It is supposed to be retired by the year of 2031, and that is why our space agency, that is ISRO, is actually planning to create our own space station by the year of 2035, in which the Gaganyaan mission is going to play a very prominent role. The second news where we are going to talk about the privilege motion, where the Congress is actually considering to promulgate a privilege motion against the Home Minister. What is this? The privilege motion basically deals with the parliamentary privileges which has been provided to the member of parliaments under Article 105 of the Constitution. And this motion is actually promulgated for the breach of such parliamentary privilege specifically by a minister. So basically the idea or the purpose of this motion is to censor the minister or to censor the government. So does this fall under a censor kind of motion which is provided to the parliament to check the ministers? Absolutely yes. And this can be moved by whom? By any member. Now, who act as the first level of scrutiny here? Obviously the Speaker of the House, which is basically the Speaker of Lok Sabha, or the Chairman of Rajya Sabha. If he can decide on the very first basis, the prima facie basis, but he can also pass the case or refer it to any privilege committee. So keep these details in your mind. The next news we are going to discuss about the Cotton Corporation of India, which was established in the year of 1970, under which act? The Companies Act of 1956. Thus it is a statutory body, where it is basically act as a government agency for what? For the trade, procurement and the export of cotton. Remember that India is the second largest producer of the cotton in the world. And this Cotton Corporation of India is actually regulated under the Textile Policy of 1985. The major role which it plays is in the price support operation. So for example, when the price of cotton falls below the MSP, the minimum support price, then the Cotton Corporation of India purchases that, which it has done very recently. The next is about the build, operate and transfer model which the government is going to adopt. Thus, government is actually putting more impetus on private-public partnership. How does this build, operate, transfer model works? So in this, basically a private sector player, let's say you are a construction company, a private company, you are going to design, build and operate a highway. Okay, so you are going to charge a toll for a certain years, and when you have recovered the cost of the construction, then the facility will be handed back to the government. So this facility is financed by what? By the public sector, and it remains in the public ownership. Correct? So this, remember these details, these kind of public-private partnership models forms an important component of your GS3 paper. So keep reading about them. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.